Okay. And so we are live. I'm just going to give it a moment or so and see if we get anybody to join us. Okay. To those people joining in on the replay, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation. I have here as my guest, Mr. Christian Watson. He is he's a spokesperson for Color Us United, which, as I understand, is a media campaign for a colorblind society. How would you describe that?
Race blind society. Race blind society.
Sorry, much better.
No, that's fine.
And also the host of Pensive Politics on YouTube, which you should go subscribe to immediately if you are not already subscribed. I asked Christian to join us today, and he does have a hard stop at 45 minutes, so we are very fortunate to have him with us. I asked him here because in a week, and it really has been a week lately of heated debate back and forth between people who've been pushing back on critical race theory and people who are defending it. We've heard a lot of arguments and so forth, but the one thing I found to be missing that I think Christian is excellent at doing is defending the principles of liberty, defending the West, the very thing that I believe critical race theory takes aim at and attacks, quite literally. And I think it's one thing to have all your anti-arguments and say why you think this is bad, but hey, can we give some airtime to Western culture? Talk about why it's good and how we can make principled arguments to defend it. And, people may still call us names, and that's okay. But as long as you are adhering to core principles, I think you need to know what those are, and you need to be able to do that. So, Christian, first tell us just a little bit about who you are and how you came to be a YouTuber and so forth, and what your point of view is on this, and then help us make better arguments.
All right, so I'll try to simplify the first part because it's very, very long. My odyssey through this sort of intellectual journey that I'm on has been very long. It's been very intense, but ultimately it is very rewarding because I get to talk to people like you and others who are in here fighting the good fight, using their God-given faculty of rationality to torch these notorious and noxious ideologies. So I'm Christian Watson. I'm currently a philosophy student. I'm in college. I got one more semester left before I graduate, which is always nice. I am a political commentator, I like to call myself. I am a podcast host of the Pensive Politics podcast. And, I'm also someone who had a very close and very unfortunate brush with one of the most, perhaps foremost terrors of Western civilization and of the American conscience, and that is critical race theory. And so I'll give people a little bit of an overview like I did in my speech before this state legislature. Me being an intellectually curious fellow, I decided to go ahead and join my collegiate debate team during my freshman year of college. Well, I figured on that team I would be able to tighten and refine my capabilities to argue points and analyze things and understand the world in a more of a richer sense. The idea of what lies beneath, what are the foundational tenets, what is beneath the crust of the earth, those things drive me because they are the antecedent. They are the necessary recipe, the condition for everything else we see. Politics in America does not exist without the maxim, all men are created equal. That is the basis for the entire political system. And that does not exist without an understanding of reality in the world as objective and intelligible. This is what natural law theorists who inspired Jefferson, who inspired John Locke, who also inspired Jefferson, who inspired Adams. This is what the natural law theorists understood. Nature is intelligible, meaning that I can understand certain things, reason through certain things that I can see out in the natural world and within myself. It's not just this amorphous, formless, shapeless blob that exists that we can look at sometimes to get an idea of what happened. No. It is a metric by which I can divine conclusions. And so I wanted to be able to cultivate my skills to do that and to do other things that entail a sort of understanding of nature, understanding of the world with collegiate debate. Because debate, in my opinion, is not about persuasion. And now there are folks who hold this opinion and they hold it cynically. A lot of folks think debate is simply a game, and they believe that persuasion is not necessarily a big part of that game. However, I hold this view on a different level because I believe that debate is not about persuasion. Debate is about finding the truth. This is what happened in ancient Greece with Socrates and the dialogues in Plato. They were trying to get to the sort of Platonic grand understanding of the truth. So I came into this space with these expectations in my head. Let's get to the truth. Let's understand what lies beneath. Let's understand that old philosophy, that first philosophy, as Aristotle would say. And I got everything but that. I was, at first, everyone seemed to be very amiable, very friendly, very jovial. But when they began understanding my political views, that's when they got angry. There was one time we were inside the library, we were doing debate prep for a tournament we were about to go to. And someone was talking about, interracial dating, and the topic led to institutional racism. And I said, well, you know what? I don't think systemic racism is as much of a problem as so many people make it. I think there are many different factors to understanding the human condition. There are many different factors to understanding how people evolve and exist in society, including people who are Black or Asian or whatever. And I think that to say that it's primarily or mostly or all racism is to be reductive. And to be reductive is to be anti-intellectual, because the intellectual has to have multiple aspects to his or her analysis. And so they were excluding their possible pool of variables in favor of a single anointed principle that not only was it not really a variable, because saying the word variable in a empirical context necessitates and implies that there is a sort of undertaking of knowledge and undertaking of investigation. But for these people, for the people who believe in critical race ideology, there is no investigation. There is no undertaking. What there is a single variable that they can use. They've already got the answer for everything. Now they've got to see how the answer fits into every part of society. And that's what I saw with my team members. And a partner of mine, because in debate we do like partner practices, right? We do, okay, you have this partner, we're on the same team. A partner of mine went back to the house of the coach, and she said to me later, hey, Christian, they were calling you an Uncle Tom, saying they cannot believe that you believe all that kind of stuff. And I said, how hurtful, because they were nice to me in my face. They were nice to me, in every other circumstance. And so when I really began digging into my team, digging into what they believed, it was a leftist stuff. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Leftist stuff is fine. I don't mind. Every opinion under the American experiment is a valuable opinion because, number one, the fact that there are a multiplicity of opinions reinforces and reasserts the idea of the freedom of conscience that is enshrined to our founding documents. So I didn't mind the leftism. I don't mind that at all. I have friends and people who I love of all political stripes. But what I did mind, however, wasn't simply leftism. It was political. It was political domineering that was birthed exactly in critical race theory. So the first time I had even heard about a critical race theorist was through collegiate debate, because even outside of my team, there were many other teams in other universities that were literally citing critical race theorists, citing their books to make arguments. There was one team that cited Derek Bell. Derek Bell is a critical race, and he I think he wrote a paper about white people sending white people up into space, outer space, to help Black people survive. And there were teams who were seriously arguing that, citing Derek Bell in the debate space. I'm like, who the heck is Derek Bell? There was a Achille Mbembe, who is a Foucaultian critical theorist, who wrote about an idea called necropolitics, the idea that the government can use politics to try to influence perceptions, import history into the future, and use that to change minds and everything. The sort of idea that government can also exert control over life through power dynamics. Michel Foucault kind of stuff. I'm like, who is Achille Mbembe? Well, what in the world is this? And all of this was reductive, and people were citing Kimberly Crenshaw, and actually one person was like, Christian, you know who Kimberly Crenshaw is? She's awesome. My teammate's going to law school with her. I'm like, huh? What? Who's Kimberly Crenshaw? So when I began actually digging into these people, I realized just how reductive, how simplified, and how emaciated a mechanism of knowledge, I should probably say a mechanism of false knowledge, that critical race theory was. And the fact that I began to realize that made me lose a lot of tournaments, because I refused to use the buzzwords like colonialism or marginalized people or bodies. I refused to reduce a dynamic and spiritual human being to a body that's single and, manifestly physical category, which rejects the sort of inner working multiplicity of dynamics that make up the human being. We are more than just bodies. We are minds. We are consciousness. We are souls. I believe that we are souls. That was my personal belief. But I refused to get involved in that kind of stuff. And for that very reason, I was ostracized. I was rejected. The coach came to me and said, Christian, I have never seen anything like this in all my years of coaching debate. However, The team and I had a conversation, and they have determined that they don't want you there anymore. Everyone on the team has determined they don't want you there anymore. I'm like, why? It's like, a lot of them do not feel as if your opinions are very offensive, and that you cause trouble. Because around this time, I was also starting events on campus, like a social justice debate between two professors who have different opinions. And that debate, and the opinions of some people went off the rails, and the debate team attended that debate, and they were abhorred that I would even try to host something like that because of the opinions that were expressed there. And it was a lot of stuff, but eventually they kicked me out. And I thought to myself, well, they kicked me out without kicking me out. Basically, they made the environment so hostile so that I would have to leave.
So in the name of anti-racism, they made the environment hostile for a Black man.
In the name of anti-racism,
he didn't have the right views.
Oh yeah. In the name of anti-racism, in the name of anti-colonialism, in the name of all kind of theories that fall under the umbrella of critical race theory, they made it very hostile for me. 100%. Yes. Oh yes.
I think that when you describe this as anti-intellectual, I actually really like that, because most of these people fancy themselves intellectuals, like they're the smartest people in the room. And in fact, technically, you are correct. It is anti-intellectual to use this kind of reductive thinking. It's also illogical. And for somebody like me who thinks about kids, right? My priority is children, right? Education of primarily K through 12, but also college. I think I'm really just interested in how this is going to help people live better, freer, more productive lives. So when you're talking about teaching something, promoting an ideology or a philosophy in the academic environment, in your case, it was debate, but also in the college, and I think of it in K-12, I just come down to explain to me how this helps students. How does this help someone learn? No, not your grandiose fantasies of changing the world. Right here, right now, in this space, in this class, like, how is it going to help you be a better debater? How is it going to help you be a better thinker, a better, philosopher, any of it? And they never have an answer. That doesn't even seem to be on the list of goals.
No, there's a reason for that, though. There's a reason for that, because these people, and when I say these people, I mean the race ideologues, people who believe in anti-racism, people who believe in critical race theory, people who believe in whiteness, people who believe in these sort of arbitrary, abstract concepts that they use to define the world. These people see all of that. They see the philosophy. They see all the vestiges of Western civilization as nothing more than the manifestation of power imbalances, which are actively, in some way, shape, or form, oppressing people who do not look like they're white. So for them to become a better anything, you have to acknowledge that there are actually good principles at the core of being a better anything. If I say I want to be a better teacher, but I refuse to engage in education that takes into account the different learning styles, the verbal learning style, the written learning style, and I think that those are inherently bad, I am rejecting some of the, I think would be, you correct me if I'm wrong, core principles of pedagogy. You have to be able to communicate to different people who understand things differently if you want to be a good teacher. But to say, I'm not going to do that, is to reject good pedagogy. And so if you don't believe in the principles, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I would take that even a step farther to say that if you walk into a classroom, and this is where you can go back to the ancients for some lessons like Socrates, and if you walk into a classroom believing that you know the truth and that you have nothing you could possibly learn from your students, even about how to be a better teacher, and you don't walk in with questions. If you think you're walking in the door with answers and only answers, and that your job as a teacher, even of very young children, is to impart knowledge, to tell them things. If your idea of teaching is, I have the answer to this and now I need to teach you the truth, you're not a teacher, you're an indoctrinator by definition. Exactly. And that a true teacher goes into the classroom and ascertains what the students already know. Where are they now in their learning journey, their learning process? What skills do they bring to the table to even acquire new knowledge? If you don't read, I have no business putting the written word in front of you to explain an important idea, because now I'm going to have to tell it to you. So I'm interfering with your learning process. So what
Yes.
I see going on in all of this is that we must teach this. And I'm like, no, you're actually not teaching. Because if you were teaching, you would walk in and ask the students, do you experience discrimination? And with very young children, why would you even do this? But let's say older children, you would ask questions. You would be applicable. It would have something to do with their learning process where they are. And for me, K through 12, it just doesn't fit. But I think when you said they're shutting down something pedagogically, you're absolutely correct. It just goes farther even than that. Not just learning styles, but even the process of teaching is not one of imparting knowledge. You have to teach people how to discover and then to integrate. Integration is not something that children, when you start getting into more abstract concepts like racism of any sort, never mind systemic, is the child even cognitively capable of integrating external and internal in this? No, they're not. They're not.
Right. And so this brings us to the confusion here. When you reject the first principles of pedagogy, either implicitly, explicitly, knowingly or not intentionally, but you can do something not intentionally, but it just happens as a result of your actions. In whatever form you reject the principles of good pedagogy in, and then you replace them with the principles of a different practice, in this instance, indoctrination, you convince yourself that the pedagogy, that the teaching style you're doing is actually a teaching style, and you're not indoctrinating people, and you cast other values, you cast other things, you cast other principles as indoctrination. So you have confused the language, and this is what people who want to take over things, people who want to dominate things always do. And most of the time it's intentional. Let me not give them too much of a bone. Most of the time it's intentional. They confuse the language. They confuse and conflate values with certain practices that they do not need to be conflated with necessarily. And then they use that understanding to impose their understanding upon the world. That is why I think critical race theory, regardless of where it is most certainly more dangerous in an educational context because of how A, vulnerable the denizens of that context are, and B, how formative they are in their minds, and how those concepts, those confusions of teaching, those confusions of indoctrination can be implanted into their mind as truth, can be implanted into their mind as proper. And then that gets you to go on people who go into college and who are amenable to other kinds of indoctrination. They go into the real world, they're amenable to other kinds of indoctrination. That's why you have so many corporations and businesses that are doing these diversity and inclusion trainings, because there are so many people who have gone through these stages. They have been amenable to this their entire intellectual journey. Well, and I would probably say their intellectual journey is not even an intellectual journey, it's an anti-intellectual journey, and they just accept it as truth. In a sense, there are so many unwitting victims of this ideology.
Yes, I would call them that. I would.
When someone sees someone out in the street, in a black mask or whatever, or a black hood, and they're smashing businesses up and they're saying, destroy the police, and they're saying America is inherently racist, we tend to think that's a crazy person. And there may be truth to that, but that's a dismissive claim. That person had to get those values from somewhere. That Antifa foot soldier had to get those values from somewhere. Now, it would be wrong of me to assume that every person who's in Antifa was informed by the school system on some level, whether it's college or high school. I don't know that to be true, but I can deduce the probability of that, and the probability that those people encountered some of the concepts, even if they weren't the radical concepts that they now embody, some of the concepts that precede the radical concepts in their intellectual journey is very probable.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand that, there are a lot of people who are victims of this ideology, and these people can manifest this ideology, whether it's in the form of destroying businesses or protesting things without having the right proper understanding of it. This happens all the time in police-involved shootings with black folks. People just immediately think because it's a white police officer and a black person, it has to be racism. Or whether it's involved in the corporate world where they're having these diversity trainings and these inclusion trainings, regardless of where it manifests because so many people just accepted all this as it is. And that is probably the biggest national security threat to the United States that's ever faced in its history, in my opinion.
Well, I think that would be an interesting segue into what we talked about at the beginning, what we want to focus on today, which is the kind of core principles that are missing, that they're throwing out, completely, that are really, they were given to us, bequeathed to us by our founders in the United States, but also by the Enlightenment thinkers in general. Okay. And that's Western Enlightenment. And that does go back all the way to Plato, as you were saying, Plato, Aristotle, and so forth. And I think because they're so busy focusing on this reductive stuff, and you have fewer people taking classics, fewer people learning real history or having any kind of curiosity about what's happening after the tip of their nose, or what the teacher tells them. What are some things that we need to remind people about, or maybe tell them about for the first time, that we're losing, that we need to champion, that we need to, when we're making these arguments and someone wants to come back, and someone mentioned it in the comments, and I think this was actually well said. It says, let's help normies, understand CRT and have less people say, oh, so you don't want kids to learn about history, you uncomfortable bigot. And we sort of chuckle, but that's true. That's exactly what they're saying. They're reducing our opposition. So I think in order for people to really feel strong in the face of that and feel like that doesn't bother me, I'm not going to let you derail me, they need to have something else instead. And the something else instead right now, because they didn't learn it, or they just don't know how to articulate it. I think you're one of the best at articulating that something else instead. So how can we explain to people? I mean, you just did a great job explaining about what you're missing out intellectually, what you're leaving on the table from your education if you attach to something like this. I personally think you're also outsourcing your morality, because they have given you a moral code that if you do what we say, you're a good person. If you don't do what we say, you're a bad person. It's like what every cult has ever done, right? But what can we say about the West to make people feel less like, because they're assaulting the West. They're saying the West is bad. It's white supremacist. And I can sit there all day long and say, no, it's not. And they'll be like, okay, Karen, somebody accused me today of being a Karen, and they spelled it with a Q, to maybe combine Q and Karen, and said, oh, I bet you have all the Starbucks managers on your speed dial or something. They reduced me to a caricature, and because I'm now not even allowed to speak about whether society is or is not exclusively white supremacist, because I apparently benefit from it because of my white skin. So, what do you say to not to those people, but to the people like me who are on the receiving end of that? I know what I say, but the average person's going, is white supremacy really underpinning all of Western society? Is that true? Did I miss something in school? There are people who sincerely don't want to be white supremacists, and they hear that and they think, I don't know, is Western, we have done some not so great things. Does that mean the West is bad? What do you say to them?
There are a few directions I want to take this, but I understand we have limited time, so I don't want to take up too much time. So let me address a few. Okay, I'm gonna go probably 2 or 3. First of all, every single person on this earth has a mind. In my opinion, their consciousness is wrapped up in that mind. This is a very philosophically contentious point, but that's just my personal opinion. And our minds are in our bodies. That's also another philosophically contentious point, but it's my personal opinion. Now, with those things accepted, it would behoove us to understand the limitations that our existence, limitations that our world puts on our ability to understand things. You can only work with the concepts you have at your disposal. Now, the greatest thing about the 21st century is that we have a digital age. Basically, anyone can get a cell phone. Even people who are at the lowest rung of the socioeconomic ladder can have some kind of cell phone that has some kind of internet access and is some variation of a smartphone. A lot of people have computers these days. Knowledge is at our fingertips. So the concepts we have at our disposal should be, ideally, multitudes of concepts, multitudes of things. But unfortunately, people will still take the concepts that they've received, even if it's through the digital age, they receive from someone close to them or someone proximal to them, and they will take those concepts and they will use them to reinterpret information that they see in the future. So essentially, when you do that, you are making your ability to learn things, you're making your ability to gain knowledge absolutely ineffective and impotent. That is the case with many people, both on the left and the right, but especially the race ideologues, because they have been given a core set of concepts and they decide that reality is simply all those concepts on a loop. And so when that is your affliction, when that, yes, oh yeah, there are people.
They're living in an alternate reality.
Richard
That means
Delgado
they're
and John
living in an
Stefan.
alternate reality.
Richard Delgado and John Stefanik quite literally said in their book, Introduction to Critical Race Theory, and these are two people who have been very formative in that theory. They literally said the only reason racism exists in American society is because of two entities, the white working class and the white elites. Actually, they didn't even say white working class. They said working class and the white elites. They have so they understand the world entirely in a similar way that Marx understood the world. They understand it in terms of classes. But guess what? Social classes, if to the extent that they even exist, I'm not sure they even exist all that much. We think we give too much significance to them. Social classes are only a sliver of, forget the world, forget the broader world, of even society. They're only a sliver of society. That ignores the individual interactions we all have, our hobbies, our interests, but they want to reduce a condition, a intellectual disposition of racism to how much money you have and what position of society you're in, without actually considering, okay, what do people in that position of society actually believe? They're materialist. This was what Marx believed, this sort of dialectical materialism. He believed that everything could be understood by simply viewing it as a material thing, nothing else. There's nothing else other than this, stuff that we see right here in front of us. They're materialists. So when people are in that kind of framework, it's going to be very hard to reach them. And when they hear the West, what they hear oppression and they hear material deprivation when they hear the West. So that's one thing. You have to understand, where are these folks coming from? I know you want to get a point in, so let me stop for a moment.
Yeah, no, I felt like it fit because when you were talking about, they're materialists and then also the elite and so forth. And I'm thinking how ironic it is that the people attaching to this most are themselves elite. They're very elite. So then the wheels start spinning and I think, okay, maybe they're self-conscious. And we go back to the sort of white guilt concept that was invented around the same time, like back in the 60s or so. And then I see this, it's all bullying and peer pressure. It works. In my day, 50 years ago, so we're going back to that time, right? It was pot and they got me to do it. I was in outer space for 15 years until I quit. Now it's this ideology. I hope it doesn't take 15 years to end this nonsense. So what I think he's onto something there with the peer pressure. Because I think my take, and tell me if you agree with me, is that a lot of the people pushing this the hardest, first of all, they are elite, which is weird. Whereas Marxism was, the Bolsheviks, you actually had the working class kind of rising up, not the elite.
You did, yes.
This is like top down. And then the next thing is there appears to be the cancel culture and all that. It is sort of a more like I won't say a fad, but I get the impression that a lot of people don't really believe this stuff. Like they repeat it on continuous loop, but I don't know that they actually believe it. It's just the speech, the script. I got to say it, kind of like how people who are in the midst of any other kind of fad or any other kind of peer pressure feedback loop will do, and only this one's really dangerous. This one's really dangerous.
I think there's some truth to that in some settings. I think that I personally know. No, right. In some settings, anecdotally, and I like to preface whenever I make examples so people know that I'm not making general claims. Anecdotally, I know people who were going to join my debate team who said, well, Christian, they wanted me to argue in favor of abortion, not because they wanted me to take a different position, but because they believe that's the only position that's valid. And if I would have said I'm pro-life, they would have probably kicked me out because that's the position they were going towards. And I just, I kind of did it. I didn't enjoy it. I was scared. I didn't want to be ostracized or known as an anti-woman or whatever. And I think that there are a lot of people like that. I mean, heck, even beyond anecdotally, statistically, people who are right-leaning on college campuses in America, statistically, are more likely than not to silence their own opinions. That's just a fact.
I can attest to that.
It's just a fact. It's a statistical fact, statistically. So this is a phenomenon that it does exist in broader society. So I think there are some people who are caught up by the winds of this ideology that indeed are scared and they simply pay lip service to it. But then there are actual people who really believe this stuff. I think BLM, people who are in BLM, both at the top level and on the bottom floor in the organization and the movement, perhaps the movement a little bit more, actually believe this stuff. I think people who are in Antifa, smashing up innocents to help Black people, apparently, actually believe this stuff. I think Kimberly Crenshaw and Derek Bell and all of them actually believe this stuff. I do.
So do the people who are sort of the uninitiated, okay, so they're not, like gonna be fine no matter what, pretty much, because they're already in the elite, and if they're giving lip service, it's lip service, and they go hide in their house and they ignore the rest of it. But the people who are, and then they're the people who are the true believers. But what do you say to those people who are like, let's say their parents, their kids are going to school and they're hearing, like on the one hand, don't fight this critical race theory, that makes you a bigot, makes you racist. They're like, well, maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe they're right. And even to the BLM people, let's say there's the lowly person on the street. If you could have an audience with these people and tell them what they're losing, what they're throwing away with both hands when they subscribe to this set of beliefs, when they attach to this philosophy or ideology instead of Western Enlightenment values, Western Enlightenment philosophy. It's not really ideology. Mm-hmm. When they say, I'm rejecting that because whiteness, or I'm rejecting that because bigotry, or whatever it is, tell them what they're really rejecting. Tell them what they're throwing away with both hands. Because they think they're throwing away bad things.
You're rejecting the basis for humanity. All the Enlightenment was, and there's a reason it's called the Enlightenment, because before the Enlightenment, we saw humanity in a very dark light that was simply informed by our biases, I shouldn't say we. A lot of people saw humanity in a dark light that was simply informed by our biases, by our individual localities. There was a reason why a lot of people believed that water was the work of the gods or something like that, and that rain was, a divine act, because that's what that perception existed in their locality, and that locality that was, enforceable by law or whatever. During the Enlightenment, you had the development of reason, you had the development of science and all kinds of other methods that we have always, in my opinion, had the capacity for, but never really exerted our capacity for until a few people said, you know what? I'm thinking with this mind. I'm walking with these legs. There has to be much more than the simplified explanations that I'm getting here. You get Bacon out of this, Francis Bacon. You get Galileo Galilei, who said no. The world is not the center of the universe. You get John Locke, who said no. The monarch is not the ruler of your life. No. You have certain rights that are embedded into your body that no one can take away, that are immutable. Not even you can violate them. You get all kind of people. You get Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said no. The art and sciences are evil and bad. You get all kind of people in this sort of burst of modernity. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with everyone. I think Rousseau was a particularly horrendous thinker, but I'm just saying you get this kind of genius out of this sort of revolution. And this genius, at the very core root of it, most of it affirms the primacy of human capacity to extend beyond the circumstances that are presumed for it at any given time.
But the natural state of man is poverty. Like your natural state. What I mean by that is not poverty like materially. I'm talking about like if you dropped a human naked in the middle of somewhere, you don't have anything. You have to like act upon your environment to get things, to survive. Right. It's not going to just magically happen.
Right. Exactly. Yes. If you drop me in the middle of an island, a deserted island, I'm going to have to. But there are. It's a poverty of resources in that area, I think. It's a poverty of perhaps even understanding if I had no prior understanding. But these capacities are still running in my head, the capacities, which is why I think the Enlightenment was possible. Because again, I would say in the Dark Ages and everything, we still had a kind of poverty of understanding. Absolutely we did. And that made people operate in ways that were bad. Lifespans were shorter. Hygiene didn't really exist. I mean, people were dying at 20 and 30 years old, average lifespans. I mean, so yeah, I think that there's something to that, what you just said.
And when you talk about water, let's take the example of water, okay? Pre-Enlightenment, if there's a stream over here but not over here, the only way that people could conceive of getting water is I got to hit you over the head and take your water, or sneak around and take your water while you're sleeping or whatever. Enlightenment comes along and says aqueduct, we can share that. We can figure out a way to run the water so we have enough water for us to survive. Or hey, let's move our people over here. We'll center all the stuff where we need the water here, and then we'll take to do this over here. So we were able to act upon the environment to extend life and improve life, and extend a kind of freedom from want and freedom from, all kinds of bad things that we weren't able to do before. That's what reason gives you. And that's
Exactly.
what, if you look at things that they're attacking now, like objective science and the scientific method, the written word, all the things that they're saying are bound up in whiteness are actually the things that make civilization function.
Precisely.
And to me, it's rude to say that this is white supremacists. Are you saying that people who are not white don't have equal accessibility and understanding and appreciation for all of this? That makes no sense to me.
And so not only do they assault the conditions for civilization, they assault the conditions for human life in general. When you assault all these methods that are outgrowths of our ability to think, to act, to learn, to speak, you're assaulting my ability to operate and exist and understand in this world. They don't want to go that far, though. They want you to understand and operate in the world that they create. They want to twist your reason. They want to twist your methods of understanding the world and cast them in the light of their ideology. So they still want you to be some kind of human, but not a fully constituted kind of human, because fully constituted kinds of humans cannot exist in the ideology that is obsessed with race as the primary function of the world. Hannah Arendt, the political theorist, who I think should be read much more. I think that I love her. She's very brilliant, and I don't always agree with everything she says, but I was reading Totalitarianism, Part 3, Origins of Totalitarianism, and she was talking about how totalitarians like to, as before they get into doing the destructive stuff, they like to create a simplified, she says, fictitious world where a single thing is the value that constitutes everything. So for the Aryans, it's for Nazi Germany, it was the Aryan race. That's the single value, and everything in that world has in some way, shape, or form to do with the Aryan race and its betterment, which is why Hitler was able to come into 1930s Germany and make those spellbinding and the opinion of historian speeches to prey on the sensibilities of the broken and hurt German people who were angry over the Treaty of Versailles. I believe. I think that's what they're angry over.
Yeah, primarily,
and then cultivate that anger to get swept into power. And the chancellor at that time, I forgot what his name was like, this is bad guys. But the passions of all the people just allow, and their fixation on this one thing, the German race, the master race, this one thing allowed a tyrannical organization, a tyrannical entity to flourish. So Arendt says, when you simplify the world and you believe and you make men think that all things are possible, that is a precondition for totalitarianism. Now look at what Kennedy did in How to Be Anti-Racist. Look what he did. He simplified the world. I read that book, and he said that the Reagan welfare policies were anti-Black because they cut programs that Black folks were on. So he believes that if something is Black adjacent, it's anti-Black. So even though welfare programs in America at that time and even now have a lot of white people on it, just because it's Black adjacent, it must be done with the intention of being against Black people. That's Kennedy's reasoning. And he, of course, famously says, the only way to beat past discrimination is what? Present discrimination.
Present discrimination, yes.
You have just simplified the world. And he also said, there is not a way to be non-racist or race neutral. There is either racism or anti-racism. All right, you have just simplified the world. You have just given me a metric that I can understand the entire world, forget society, the entire world through. And you have cast that within the boundaries of systems of power. So now not only is the world not about ideas primarily, it's about power and how those ideas function through the annals of power. So Kennedy actually engaged, this is a bold claim. I make these claims very carefully, but I think that it's right personally. Kennedy actually engages in the kind of trickery that Hannah Arendt warns against.
Oh, I agree with you.
This guy is the prophet of anti-racism. The prophet of race ideology.
I think also people underestimate. They say he's a lightweight and this and that. And I mean, I think intellectually, in terms of his arguments, they're very lightweight, but I think they're designed to be. But I don't underestimate him. I don't look at him and say he doesn't know what he's doing. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. I want people to understand that what they call West or Western or white supremacist or whiteness or all of these things that they've wrapped up in a package as all the bad things are not only all the things that make human life possible, okay, and sustain it. But they're also the things that they are using themselves. Their hypocrisy is self-evident. It ought to be self-evident because they're saying, here, buy my book. By the millions of copies. Okay. But capitalism is bad and the printing press is bad and the written word is bad and all these things are bad. So I think, what I hope people can take away from this brief conversation is that thinking is good. Reason is good. Reason gave us all the things that make this possible. Like, we're not a tribal society hitting each other over the head to get access to the only water in town. And if we continue to go down this path of thinking that we can oversimplify the world into one true thing that pits us against our neighbors and against other people, that we are heading down an extremely dangerous path and throwing away all the gains of humankind in the process.
Agreed. 100%. 100%.
So,
and yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
So I know you have a hard to stop. I could talk to you all day. But I hope everybody go ahead. Well, how do you want to finish it off? You finish it off.
Well, look, Deb, I really appreciate you having me on. And again, I like the work you're doing. I love the work you're doing. I first found out about you through the interview that you and Justice Graves did on Carlin's show. And I think that what you're doing is really important because, as I mentioned, educational facilities are factories for the impressionable. They're factories for these people who are stuck trying to grow and trying to understand the world, trying to understand what's happening with them and their own personal development, their bodies, their relationships. And to have this ideology, which is just so certain about a single thing and impose it upon them is I think it's cruel. It borders on cruelty, in my opinion.
I think it's child abuse. And the thing that kills me is that I was frustrated with schools before I really understood like CRT. And I was so frustrated with the level of indoctrination already. I was so frustrated with the lack of focus on literacy, especially for the people who need it most. I've been a proponent of school choice for so long because the one thing I absolutely do believe perpetuates inequality is the lack of literacy. If you cannot read, if you are a prisoner in a bad school and you can't get out and you don't have a wall of books at home and you don't have a college educated parent and you don't have these things, and I'm not going to use the privilege word. I'm just going to say they're just differences. And that's true across races. It's more of a class thing. If you don't have those things and your school doesn't take a step to scaffold you up there, that will perpetuate. That will perpetuate. Yes. And I've been beating that drum for 3 decades now, I feel like. And so when this came on the scene, I feel like I'm drowning. I just feel like I'm just trying to defend reason. That's why the channel is called The Reason We Learn. And they're smothering me in a world of unreason. They're assaulting reality. They're assaulting thinking. And I hope people go to your channel. Please do subscribe to Christian's channel because he does a really great analyses of some of these issues and some of the bad arguments. I've seen you take on like just a specific argument and just tear it apart and say, this is why this doesn't make any sense. So if you want to learn how to use reason yourself, maybe you didn't learn it all that great in school because, even I didn't. I had to learn it like from home. So, you can watch other people and learn from other people who do it well. And I'd say you're one of the people I know who does it very well. So
thank you, Deb. I appreciate it.
On that note, I hope you will come back another time.
I will.
And we can discuss
100%.
Other things at greater length. In the meantime,
much longer.
Good luck. What are you working on now that anyone need to know? Tell us real briefly about the Us United.
So basically, I can only give you guys a few details, but it's basically a campaign that is going to be fighting for a race-blind society. And what that means will come out in the next few weeks, but I'm very excited about that. And I'm also just doing YouTube stuff as well. I'm going to be taking on a lot of people who are hustling certain ideas in the Black and amongst Black people in America that are dishonest, like Dr. Umar Johnson, the Pan-Africanist movement, and all those people who are trying to impose their own kind of fictitiousness upon African Americans so they can get along with this woke stuff. So
have you connected with Free Black Thought on Twitter and their website?
Not.
Okay, so you need to be connected because they have a list of all the podcasts and they're really promoting the heterodoxy and Black thought and making sure that people understand that there is huge viewpoint diversity in I hate to call it the
Yes.
Black community, but in in America, amongst people who are Black, and this notion that everybody thinks alike is utterly ridiculous. We don't all think alike as people, never mind people who look a certain way. And so that's their mission, is to make sure that people are promoted and amplified so that we can really hear from free Black thought, thinkers who
Absolutely.
are thinking and talking and exploring these ideas. So I'm going to make sure they know about you.
Thank you so much.
I will talk to you soon, I hope.
100%. Absolutely.
Have
Thank
a
you, Deb.
great day.
You too.
What's
Bye-bye.
left of it.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Take it easy. Thanks
You
for
too.
coming, everybody. And thank you for the super chats.